For years, I believed there was something wrong with me. Not because anyone else said so, because my husband did. And eventually, after hearing the same thing enough times, I started believing it. It didn't happen all at once. Marcus wasn't obvious about it. People imagine manipulation as something loud, aggressive, easy to recognize. My experience was the opposite. It was subtle, quiet, slow, like water wearing down stone, one conversation at a time, one denial at a time, one doubt at a time, until eventually I no longer trusted myself. Marcus and I have been married for 21 years. From the outside, our marriage looks stable, successful, ordinary, the kind of relationship people admired. We owned a comfortable home, shared holiday traditions, attended neighborhood gatherings, celebrated anniversaries, posed for smiling photographs. To everyone around us, we appeared happy. For a long time, I believed that image too. Then small things started happening, little inconsistencies, little moments that didn't make sense. The first one seemed insignificant. I was driving home from work when I saw Marcus's car parked outside a restaurant across town. At first, I smiled. Maybe we could surprise each other. Maybe he was grabbing lunch nearby. But as I got closer, I realized something strange. Marcus had told me he was attending meetings nearly 2 hours away, important meetings that supposedly required him to be in another city. Yet there sat his car, right in front of me. I remember staring at it through a red light, certain it was his. Same model, same color, same personalized license plate. Impossible to mistake. When I mentioned it that evening, he laughed. Actually laughed. "You must have seen someone else's car." I frowned. "It had your license plate. Then you probably read it wrong." The confidence in his voice surprised me because I knew what I saw, or at least I thought I did. The conversation ended there. No argument, no explanation, just certainty, his certainty, and eventually I let it go. But the incidents continued. A few months later, he claimed to be attending an overnight conference. The next afternoon, while shopping across town, I thought I saw him entering a furniture store. Again, I wasn't entirely sure. Again, I mentioned it later. Again, Marcus dismissed it immediately. You really need to stop imagining things. Imagining things. The phrase bothered me, yet somehow I apologized. Apologized for asking a question. Looking back, that should have been a warning sign. At the time, it felt normal, because by then, I had already started questioning myself. That was Marcus's gift, not lying, convincing me I couldn't recognize the lies. Over time, his explanations became predictable. If I noticed a discrepancy, he had an answer. If I remembered something differently, he corrected me. If I questioned his stories, he accused me of misunderstanding. Always calm, always reasonable, always confident. The confidence made all the difference, because certainty is persuasive, especially when it comes from someone you love, someone you've trusted for decades, someone who seems completely convinced you're mistaken. I began keeping mental notes, not intentionally, just naturally. Dates, times, conversations, events that didn't quite fit. The list grew longer every year, yet every time I tried discussing it, the outcome remained the same. Marcus denied, Marcus explained, Marcus corrected, and somehow I ended up feeling guilty, as though my concerns were unfair, as though my questions represented a problem, as though my instincts couldn't be trusted. The worst part wasn't the arguments, it was what happened afterwards, the self-doubt, the endless second-guessing, the hours spent wondering whether I had remembered something incorrectly, whether I had misunderstood, whether I had overreacted. I became my own investigator, constantly reviewing events, constantly searching for certainty, constantly wondering if I was being unreasonable. That uncertainty followed me everywhere. Friends noticed changes, family noticed changes, even I noticed changes. I became quieter, more cautious, less confident. I stopped speaking up on things, stopped trusting my instincts, stopped believing my own observations, because every time I did, Marcus convinced me they were wrong. Years passed that way. Years. Looking back now, that's the part that hurts most. Not the lies, not the affairs, not even the secrets I eventually uncovered. What hurts most is realizing how effectively Marcus taught me to doubt myself. Because once someone takes away your trust in your own judgment, they gain enormous power. Power over your memories, power over your decisions, power over your reality. And for a very long time, Marcus had that power. I didn't know it then, but everything was about to change. Not because of a confrontation, not because Marcus confessed, not because I finally discovered evidence. The truth arrived through an elderly neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Thompson, a woman I had known for years, a woman who knocked on my front door one ordinary afternoon, carrying a small flash drive. And inside that flash drive was something Marcus never expected to exist: proof. Years and years of proof, the kind of proof that doesn't forget, doesn't argue, doesn't change its story. A camera had been watching when Marcus thought nobody was looking, and before that day ended, my entire understanding of my marriage was about to change forever. I almost didn't answer the door. That detail seems strange now, but looking back, it's true. I was folding laundry that afternoon when the doorbell rang. Nothing unusual, just another ordinary weekday, the kind of day that disappears into memory. At least that's what I thought. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Thompson standing on the porch. She was 82 years old, widowed, kind, the type of neighbor who remembered birthdays and baked cookies for everyone during the holidays. She had lived on our street longer than anyone else. Everyone trusted her, including me. When I opened the door, she seemed unusually nervous, not frightened, uncomfortable, like someone carrying information they weren't sure how to deliver. "Angela," she said softly, "do you have a few minutes?" I immediately noticed the flash drive in her hand, a small black device, ordinary, unremarkable, yet somehow she held it as though it weighed 10 pounds. "Of course." She hesitated, then looked over her shoulder toward the street. "I think you need to see something." The seriousness in her voice caught my attention immediately. I invited her inside. We sat at the kitchen table. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Mrs. Thompson kept turning the flash drive between her fingers, back and forth, back and forth. Finally, she took a deep breath. "You know I installed security cameras last year." I nodded. Everyone knew. A series of package thefts had affected several homes in the neighborhood. Mrs. Thompson was one of the victims. The camera seemed like a reasonable precaution, nothing unusual, nothing significant, at least not at the time. She continued, "The cameras cover more than my porch." I still didn't understand where the conversation was going. She explained that the footage automatically stored for extended periods, thousands of hours of recordings. I listened politely, confused, waiting for the point. Then her expression changed. The kindness remained, but sadness appeared too, the kind of sadness people carry when they know they're about to hurt someone. I wasn't looking for anything involving Marcus. The moment she said his name, my stomach tightened. Instantly, a reaction so fast I couldn't control it. Mrs. Thompson noticed, I could tell. She lowered her eyes briefly before continuing. "A few weeks ago, I was reviewing older recordings." My pulse quickened, for reasons I couldn't explain, not yet. Something about her tone felt important, dangerously important. I noticed some things. The room suddenly felt smaller, quieter, heavier. What things? The question barely escaped my mouth. She slid the flash drive across the table toward me, slowly, carefully, almost reluctantly. "Maybe it's nothing." She paused, then shook her head. "No." Another pause. "It's not nothing." I stared at the flash drive, unable to look away, unable to fully understand why. Mrs. Thompson continued speaking, explaining that she spent several weeks deciding whether to bring it to me. Several weeks. That detail mattered because it meant whatever she found wasn't minor, wasn't casual, wasn't harmless. She had struggled with the decision, which meant the information carried weight, real weight. Finally, I stood and retrieved my laptop. My hands were already shaking, a little, not dramatically, just enough to notice. Mrs. Thompson remained silent while I plugged in the flash drive. Several folders appeared, organized by date, month, year. The recording stretched back farther than I expected, much farther. I clicked the first file. Nothing happened immediately. Just an ordinary residential street, cars passing, neighbors walking dogs, children riding bicycles. Normal. Completely normal. Then a familiar vehicle entered the frame. My breath caught. Marcus's car. There was no question, no uncertainty, no possibility of mistake. It was Marcus's car, and according to the timestamp, it was parked on our street during a week he claimed he was attending a conference 3 states away. I stared, certain I had misread something, certain there must be an explanation. Then another clip began, and another, each one carrying the same uncomfortable message. Marcus was present, physically present, on dates when he repeatedly insisted he wasn't. My chest tightened, not because I had proof of an affair, not yet, not because I understood everything, I didn't. The footage created more questions than answers. What hurt was something else, something deeper, because as I watched those timestamps, a memory surfaced. A conversation from years earlier, one where I questioned his whereabouts, one where he told me I was imagining things, one where I apologized afterwards, apologized for being suspicious, for being unreasonable, for failing to trust him. I felt sick because suddenly I remembered dozens of similar conversations, dozens, maybe hundreds, all ending exactly the same way. Marcus insisting, me doubting, Marcus correcting, me apologizing. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Mrs. Thompson placed a gentle hand on mine. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The footage was already speaking for itself. And as the next recording began playing on the screen, I realized something terrifying. The clips I had seen so far were only the beginning. There were hundreds more, hundreds, and somewhere inside those recordings was the truth Marcus had spent years convincing me didn't exist. For the next 3 hours, neither Mrs. Thompson nor I said very much. There wasn't much to say. The footage was doing all the talking. Clip after clip, date after date, year after year. Each recording revealing another small piece of a reality Marcus had spent years denying. At first, I kept searching for innocent explanations. Old habits die hard. Even with evidence sitting directly in front of me, part of my mind still tried to defend him, still tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, still tried to find a reason why what I was seeing couldn't possibly mean what it appeared to mean. That realization embarrassed me, not because I was naive, because I finally understood how deeply Marcus's manipulation had affected me. I had been trained to doubt my own conclusions, even when the evidence was staring directly at me. The first truly devastating clip appeared around an hour into the footage. The timestamp showed a Friday evening, 3 years earlier, I remembered that weekend immediately. Marcus had supposedly traveled to Chicago for a corporate conference. We argued before he left, not a major argument, just one of those uncomfortable conversations that linger afterward. I told him his story didn't make sense. He told me I was being paranoid. By the time he left, I felt guilty, ashamed even. I spent the weekend wondering whether I had unfairly accused him. Now the camera showed something entirely different. Marcus's car pulled onto our street shortly after 6 o'clock. He parked several houses away, then waited for nearly 20 minutes. The footage continued. Eventually, another vehicle arrived. A woman stepped out. She entered Marcus's car. The two of them drove away together. My stomach dropped. I watched the clip again, then once more. Each viewing produced the same result, the same conclusion, the same painful certainty. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. I had been right. The memory of that old argument suddenly felt unbearable, not because Marcus lied, because he convinced me the lie was my fault. That distinction mattered more than I could explain. The affair hurt. The manipulation hurt even more. Mrs. Thompson quietly excused herself shortly afterward. Before leaving, she squeezed my shoulder, gently, kindly. "I'm sorry, Angela." I nodded, unable to speak. After she left, I remained at the kitchen table alone. The footage continued playing, one clip after another, one revelation after another. The afternoon slowly became evening, then night. I barely noticed. I couldn't stop watching. Every recording seemed connected to a memory, a disagreement, a conversation, a moment when I questioned something and Marcus dismissed it. Now the camera was validating those memories one by one. Around midnight, I discovered something that changed the investigation completely. A series of recordings from nearly 5 years earlier. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Marcus arrived home, Marcus left home. Ordinary activity. Then a pattern emerged, a very specific pattern. Several times each month, Marcus visited the same house, a property located only 3 streets away, close enough to walk, close enough that we passed it regularly, yet I had never paid attention to it. Why would I? It was just another house, another neighbor, another address. The footage showed Marcus entering repeatedly, daytime, evening, weekends, different seasons, different years, always the same property, always the same destination. I immediately remembered asking about that house once, just once, years earlier. I had seen Marcus's vehicle parked nearby. When I mentioned it, he laughed, said I must have confused his car with someone else's. The explanation sounded ridiculous now, because the footage didn't merely show the car, it showed Marcus himself walking directly toward the property, again and again and again, for years. The realization sent a chill through me, because random affairs are one thing, patterns lasting years are something else entirely. The footage wasn't showing isolated incidents, it was documenting a system, a routine, a hidden life operating in plain sight, one that existed only a few streets away from our home, one that somehow remained invisible because Marcus convinced me not to trust what I saw. I paused the video and leaned back in my chair. The house was silent. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Outside, the neighborhood slept peacefully. Inside, my entire understanding of the past was collapsing, not because the footage created a new reality, because it confirmed the reality I had been experiencing all along, a reality Marcus spent years denying. For the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to consider a possibility. What if I wasn't wrong? What if I had never been wrong? What if all those instincts, all those suspicions, all those uncomfortable feelings I spent years apologizing for had actually been telling me the truth? The question changed everything, because once I asked it, another realization followed immediately behind it. If the camera had already exposed this much, what else was waiting inside those recordings? I didn't sleep that night, not even for a few minutes. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw timestamps, dates, images, memories, pieces of my life rearranging themselves into something I barely recognized. By sunrise, I had watched nearly 12 hours of footage, and the deeper I went, the worse it became. Not because the recordings revealed shocking new behavior every few minutes, because they revealed consistency, patterns, repetition, the same destinations, the same routines, the same lies, over and over again. A single affair would have been devastating. What I was seeing looked much larger, much more organized, much more deliberate. At 7 o'clock that morning, Marcus called. His name appeared on my phone screen. For several seconds, I simply stared at it, watching it ring, listening to the familiar tone, a tone that suddenly felt different, foreign somehow, because now I knew things I hadn't known yesterday, things he didn't realize I knew. Eventually, I answered, "Good morning." His voice sounded normal, casual, relaxed. The same voice I'd heard thousands of times, the same voice that convinced me to doubt myself for years. For the first time, I listened differently, carefully, objectively, like a witness instead of a wife. We spoke for a few minutes, nothing remarkable, nothing dramatic. Then he mentioned where he would be that afternoon, a meeting across town, important clients, several hours, maybe longer. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because I already knew he was lying. The footage from previous months had established a pattern, the same excuse, the same time frame, the same destination. Only the destination wasn't a meeting, it was that house, the house 3 streets away. I ended the call politely, then sat in silence. The emotional impact surprised me. Not anger, not yet. Relief. Pure relief. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't questioning my perception. I wasn't wondering whether I misunderstood. I wasn't wondering whether I remembered incorrectly. I knew, absolutely knew. The certainty felt unfamiliar, but wonderful. Later that afternoon, I decided to test something, not Marcus, myself. I parked several blocks away from the property shown repeatedly in the recordings. Then I waited. The situation felt surreal. Part of me couldn't believe I was doing it. Another part couldn't believe how long it took me to start trusting myself. The wait lasted less than 40 minutes. Then Marcus arrived, exactly as the footage suggested he would, exactly as I suspected he would, exactly where he claimed he would never be. I watched from a distance. My pulse quickened, not because I discovered something new, because I witnessed confirmation in real time. Marcus exited his vehicle, looked around briefly, then walked toward the house, the same routine, the same lie. For several moments, I simply sat there, staring, not devastated, not shocked, validated. The feeling caught me off guard. Most people expect betrayal to produce heartbreak, and it did, but beneath the heartbreak was something else. Vindication. Years of self-doubt began cracking apart, years of uncertainty, years of second-guessing, years of apologizing for things I was right about. The emotional release was overwhelming. I actually cried, not because I saw Marcus enter the house, because I finally stopped doubting myself. The distinction mattered a lot. That evening, I reviewed additional footage. This time, I approached it differently, not as a wife searching for explanations, as an investigator examining evidence. The change in perspective revealed things I previously missed. Small details, repeated behaviors, consistent patterns. Marcus frequently transported items between vehicles, furniture, boxes, household goods. At first, the activity seemed random. Then I noticed something interesting. Many of the items appeared destined for that same property, the same house, the same location, the same hidden destination that appeared throughout years of recordings. The footage began telling a larger story, a story extending beyond affairs, beyond excuses, beyond late-night absences. It looked like Marcus had been building something, supporting something, maintaining something for years. One clip in particular caught my attention. The timestamp showed a Saturday afternoon nearly 2 years ago. Marcus unloaded a dining room table from a truck, then carried it inside. I remembered that table perfectly. Marcus told me he sold it online, said a buyer from another city purchased it, said he delivered it personally. I remembered believing him. I remembered helping him clean it beforehand. Now, the camera showed the truth. The table never left the neighborhood. It simply changed addresses. That discovery hit me harder than I expected, because it wasn't about furniture. It was about memory. Another memory Marcus had rewritten. Another reality he convinced me to question. Another moment when my instincts had been correct. As darkness settled outside, I paused the footage again. The room felt quiet, heavy, almost sacred, like a place where truth was finally being allowed to exist. And for the first time since Mrs. Thompson handed me that flash drive, I understood something important. The videos weren't merely exposing Marcus, they were restoring me, one recording at a time. The next week became an education. Not about Marcus, about manipulation. For years, I thought the biggest problem in my marriage was dishonesty. The footage taught me otherwise. Lying was only part of it. The deeper problem was what happened after the lies, the denial, the deflection, the constant effort to convince me that reality itself was unreliable. Once I understood that, countless memories suddenly made sense. Moments I had spent years replaying inside my head. Arguments that left me confused. Conversations that somehow ended with me apologizing. Situations where I entered feeling certain and left feeling ashamed. At the time, I couldn't explain why those conversations affected me so deeply. Now I could, because they weren't ordinary disagreements. They were battles over reality, and Marcus had spent years making sure he controlled it. One afternoon, I sat down with a notebook, not because I needed more evidence, because I needed perspective. I started writing down incidents I remembered: the restaurant, the conference, the house 3 streets away, the furniture, the unexplained absences, the mysterious phone calls, the inconsistencies, the stories that never quite fit. Page after page filled with memories, and something remarkable happened. For the first time, those memories aligned. They stopped contradicting one another, stopped feeling fragmented, stopped feeling uncertain. The footage had provided context. Suddenly, everything fit. Every uncomfortable feeling, every suspicious moment, every instinct I spent years suppressing. They weren't random, they were signals, and I had been receiving them all along. A few days later, I contacted an attorney, not because I was ready to file for divorce, not yet, because I needed information, needed guidance, needed someone objective to review what I had discovered. The attorney spent nearly 2 hours examining selected footage, occasionally taking notes, occasionally asking questions, mostly watching. When she finally looked up, her expression was serious. Not shocked, not surprised, serious. What concerns me most isn't the affairs. The statement caught me off guard because the affairs seemed pretty concerning. She continued, "What concerns me is the pattern." The word echoed in my mind. Pattern. That was exactly what I kept seeing. Not isolated incidents. Patterns, repeated behaviors, repeated deceptions, repeated attempts to alter my perception of events. The attorney asked a question nobody had ever asked me before. How long have you been doubting yourself? I didn't answer immediately because I wasn't sure. The truth was difficult to measure. When exactly does self-doubt begin? When does confidence slowly erode? When does trust in your own judgment start disappearing? The process happened so gradually I barely noticed it until now. Eventually I answered, years. The word felt painfully inadequate. Years, a simple word describing an incredibly complicated experience. The attorney nodded, then said something I will never forget. Based on what I've seen, your instincts appear to have been remarkably accurate. I stared at her. The sentence shouldn't have been emotional, yet it was. More emotional than discovering some of the footage, more emotional than uncovering certain lies, because nobody had ever said that to me before. Nobody. For years, I heard the opposite. You're mistaken. You're imagining things. You're overreacting. You're paranoid. You're confused. Now, suddenly, someone was telling me the exact reverse. Your instincts were accurate. The statement felt almost overwhelming. I didn't realize how desperately I needed to hear it until that moment. After the meeting, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, thinking, reflecting, remembering. The attorney wasn't simply validating evidence, she was validating me. The difference mattered enormously. Evidence proves what happened. Validation restores what was damaged. And what Marcus damaged most wasn't trust in our marriage. It was trust in myself. That realization followed me home. That evening, I reviewed another series of recordings. This time, I noticed something different. Not Marcus, my reaction to Marcus. Earlier footage sessions left me devastated. Now they left me stronger. Not because the behavior hurt less, because the recordings were no longer teaching me about him. They were teaching me about myself. Each clip became another reminder. You saw correctly. You remembered correctly. You understood correctly. The camera wasn't giving me new instincts. It was confirming the ones I already had. The distinction changed everything. As midnight approached, I closed the laptop and walked outside. The neighborhood looked peaceful, quiet, ordinary. Streetlights illuminated familiar sidewalks. Trees swayed gently in the evening breeze. Across the street sat Mrs. Thompson's house, the house that unknowingly held years of truth. The house where a security camera quietly recorded reality while I spent years being told reality wasn't real. I stood there for several minutes, looking at it, thinking about everything that had happened, thinking about everything I still needed to do, the divorce, the conversations, the legal process, the future. All of it felt intimidating, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to be wrong, because now I knew something Marcus never wanted me to learn. My voice could be trusted, my memory could be trusted, my instincts could be trusted. And once that truth finally settled inside me, I realized something powerful. No matter what happened next, I was never going to surrender that trust again. The decision to file for divorce didn't happen in a dramatic moment. There was no confrontation, no screaming match, no scene from a movie. Just clarity. Quiet, undeniable clarity. After years of confusion, clarity felt revolutionary. For so long, every major decision in my life had been filtered through uncertainty. What if I'm wrong? What if I misunderstood? What if Marcus is telling the truth? Those questions had governed everything. Now they were gone. Not because I suddenly became fearless, because evidence had finally broken the cycle. The footage removed doubt, and once doubt disappeared, decisions became easier. Not easy, just easier. A week after meeting with the attorney, I formally began the divorce process. Signing the paperwork felt surreal. 21 years, reduced to documents, forms, signatures, legal language. The reality felt both enormous and strangely simple. A marriage built over decades, a decision made with the stroke of a pen. Yet, beneath the sadness was something unexpected. Relief. Deep, overwhelming relief. Not because I wanted the marriage to end, because I finally stopped fighting reality. For years, I had been fighting it, trying to reconcile what I observed with what Marcus told me, trying to make incompatible truths fit together, trying to convince myself that my instincts were wrong. Now I didn't have to. Reality could simply be reality. The first time Marcus received notice from my attorney, he called almost immediately. I wasn't surprised. In fact, I had been expecting it. What surprised me was how familiar the conversation felt. Within minutes, he returned to old habits, confusion, denial, deflection, the same strategies that worked for years. At least they used to. Where is all of this coming from? His voice sounded genuinely puzzled, almost wounded, as though he were the victim. Years earlier, that tone would have affected me. Years earlier, I would have started questioning myself, started explaining, started defending my position. Not anymore, because now I knew what was happening. The performance only works when the audience believes it, and I no longer believed it. When I mentioned the footage, a long silence followed. The silence spoke louder than any explanation. For several seconds, neither of us said anything. Then Marcus did something unexpected. He laughed. A short, uncomfortable laugh, the kind people use when they're trying to regain control of a conversation. Security footage? The dismissal sounded forced, weak, desperate. I heard something in his voice I had never heard before. Uncertainty. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, uncertainty belonged to me. Now it belonged to him. The shift felt significant, powerful, liberating, because for once I wasn't the person struggling to prove reality existed. He was. The conversation ended quickly after that, not because we resolved anything, because there was nothing left to resolve. The evidence existed, the footage existed, the truth existed, whether Marcus acknowledged it or not. After the call ended, I sat quietly in my living room, thinking about all the similar conversations we had over the years, hundreds of them, maybe more. The difference was astonishing. In the past, those conversations left me drained, confused, anxious. This one left me calm, certain, steady. The contrast revealed just how much damage self-doubt had caused, because confidence changes everything, not arrogance, confidence. The simple belief that your own perceptions deserve consideration, that your own experiences matter, that your own observations are valid. People take that belief for granted until it's taken away, and once it's taken away, rebuilding it becomes incredibly important. The legal process moved forward steadily. Attorneys exchanged information, documents were requested, financial records were reviewed, the usual procedures unfolded. Throughout the process, the footage remained central, not because it exposed every secret, because it established credibility, patterns, timelines, consistency. The recordings documented years of behavior, years of contradictions, years of deception. More importantly, they documented something else, my reality, the reality Marcus spent years denying. One afternoon, my attorney called with an update. Several recordings have proven particularly useful, not simply because they showed suspicious activity, because they contradicted statements Marcus made repeatedly. The timestamps mattered, the dates mattered, the consistency mattered. Truth has a remarkable advantage over lies. Truth doesn't have to remember its story. The recordings never changed, never adjusted, never revised themselves. They simply existed, patiently waiting for someone to pay attention. That evening, I found myself standing in front of a mirror, an ordinary moment, nothing significant, yet I stared longer than usual, studying my reflection, thinking about the woman looking back at me. For years, she seemed uncertain, apologetic, careful, always worried she might be wrong. Now I saw something different. Not strength exactly. Strength was still developing. What I saw was trust. Trust returning, slowly, steadily, one day at a time. And as I looked at my reflection, I realized something else. The divorce wasn't just ending a marriage, it was ending a version of myself. The version that constantly questioned her own reality. The version that apologized for being right. The version that handed someone else control over her voice. That version was finally disappearing, and in her place, someone new was beginning to emerge. The strangest part of recovery was realizing how many areas of my life had been affected by self-doubt. At first, I thought the damage existed only inside my marriage. That seemed logical. Marcus was the source of it. Marcus created it. Marcus benefited from it. But once I started rebuilding my confidence, I noticed something surprising. The uncertainty had spread far beyond our relationship. It influenced decisions at work, friendships, family conversations, even simple daily choices. For years, I had developed a habit of second-guessing myself, not because I lacked intelligence, not because I lacked experience, because I had been conditioned to believe my first instinct was probably wrong. The realization was frustrating and empowering. Frustrating because I understood how much it cost me. Empowering because now I could change it. The process began with small things, very small things. Choosing a restaurant without asking for multiple opinions, making plans without constantly seeking reassurance, trusting my memory during conversations, trusting my judgment when solving problems. Simple actions, ordinary actions, yet each one felt important. Each one reinforced a lesson I was still learning. I could trust myself. The more I practiced, the easier it became. Not perfect, just better. One afternoon, I met a close friend for coffee, someone who had known me for years, someone who witnessed much of my marriage from the outside. Halfway through the conversation, she said something unexpected. "You seem different." I smiled because I knew exactly what she meant. Different wasn't necessarily happier. Different wasn't necessarily stronger. Different meant present, certain, comfortable in my own thoughts, comfortable expressing opinions without immediately questioning them. When I asked what specifically she noticed, her answer surprised me. "You're not apologizing anymore." The observation hit me hard because she was right. I used to apologize constantly for asking questions, for expressing concerns, for disagreeing, for remembering things differently, for existing sometimes. The habit became so automatic I barely noticed it. Now it was fading, not because I became rude, because I stopped assuming I was wrong before conversations even began. That shift changed everything. As the divorce continued, additional evidence emerged. Financial records, messages, documents, none of it shocked me anymore. The major revelations had already happened. The footage prepared me. The truth was no longer arriving as a surprise. It was arriving as confirmation, and confirmation hurts differently than discovery. Discovery creates chaos. Confirmation creates certainty. By then, certainty felt like a gift. One evening, I revisited some of the earliest recordings, not because I needed evidence, because I wanted perspective. I watched one of the clips that originally devastated me, Marcus arriving home during a period when he claimed to be out of town. Years earlier, that footage made me cry. Now it produced a completely different reaction. Compassion. Not for Marcus, for myself, for the woman I used to be, the woman who saw warning signs and was told she imagined them, the woman who trusted someone else's version of reality more than her own, the woman who carried confusion for years because she believed honesty would eventually prevail. I felt protective of her, protective in a way I never had before, because I finally understood something. She wasn't weak, she wasn't foolish, she wasn't paranoid. She was responding normally to abnormal circumstances. Anyone subjected to constant denial would eventually question themselves. Anyone. Recognizing that truth lifted an enormous burden. For years, I secretly blamed myself, not for Marcus's behavior, for failing to uncover it sooner, for not trusting my instincts, for not seeing through the manipulation. Now I understood how unfair that judgment was. The responsibility belonged to the person creating the deception, not the person trying to make sense of it. That distinction mattered a lot. Several weeks later, Mrs. Thompson stopped by again. This time, she brought cookies. Not evidence, not flash drives, just cookies. The visit felt refreshingly normal. We sat on the porch and talked about gardening, neighborhood news, weather, ordinary things. Before leaving, she looked at me carefully, then smiled. "You seem lighter." The comment made me laugh because it echoed what my friend said earlier. Different people, different observations, same conclusion. I was changing, not because the situation became easier, because I stopped carrying responsibilities that never belonged to me. The responsibility to prove reality existed, the responsibility to convince Marcus to tell the truth, the responsibility to explain away contradictions, the responsibility to doubt myself. All of it was gone. As the sun began to set that evening, I sat alone on the porch after Mrs. Thompson left. The neighborhood looked peaceful, familiar, safe. For the first time in years, I felt aligned with myself, my thoughts, my memories, my instincts. Everything finally pointed in the same direction, and that alignment created something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Peace. Real peace. Not the fragile peace that comes from avoiding conflict, the durable peace that comes from trusting your own voice. And once I found that voice again, I realized something important. No matter how the divorce ended, no matter what else I discovered, Marcus could never take that voice away from me again. By the time the divorce reached its most difficult stages, I was no longer focused on catching Marcus in lies. That chapter was over. The footage had already accomplished that. The evidence existed. The patterns existed. The truth existed. Whether Marcus admitted it or not no longer mattered as much as it once did. What mattered now was rebuilding my life. And rebuilding turned out to be harder than I expected. Not because I missed Marcus, because I was learning how to trust myself again. Trust sounds simple until you lose it. Then you discover how deeply it affects everything. Every decision, every relationship, every plan, every dream. For years, I measured my judgment against Marcus's version of reality. Now, there was only mine. The adjustment felt strange, like learning to walk after spending years leaning on a crutch that had been hurting me the entire time. One afternoon, I found myself standing in a furniture store. An ordinary errand, a simple purchase. I needed a dining table for the house I would eventually move into after the divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me. A dining table, just like the one Marcus claimed he sold years ago. The same table I later watched him carry into another house on security footage. For a moment, the memory stung. Then something unexpected happened. I smiled. Because for the first time, the memory didn't make me feel foolish, it made me feel validated. The evidence had transformed so many painful memories. What once felt like uncertainty now felt like proof. I bought the table that afternoon, not because it was particularly special, because it represented something, a fresh start, a decision made entirely on my own. No explanations, no arguments, no second guessing, just a choice, my choice. The divorce proceedings continued steadily. Depositions, document requests, financial disclosures, the usual legal machinery, moving forward one step at a time. Throughout the process, Marcus remained remarkably consistent. He minimized, explained, deflected. Sometimes he even contradicted evidence that existed on video. The behavior would have frustrated me years earlier. Now it fascinated me. Not because I enjoyed it, because I finally recognized it for what it was, a habit, a deeply ingrained habit. Marcus had spent so many years controlling narratives that he seemed unable to stop, even when the evidence existed, even when the facts were obvious, even when denial no longer worked. Watching it unfold taught me something important. Manipulation isn't always about convincing other people. Sometimes it's about protecting the manipulator from reality. That realization gave me perspective, and strangely, it gave me freedom, because I stopped expecting accountability, stopped expecting honesty, stopped expecting explanations. Once those expectations disappeared, disappointment lost much of its power. One evening, I attended a support group recommended by my therapist. At first, I resisted the idea. Support groups sounded uncomfortable, awkward, too personal. I was wrong. The room contained people with experiences different from mine, different marriages, different betrayals, different stories. Yet, a common theme emerged quickly: self-doubt. Nearly everyone described some version of it. The details varied, the emotions didn't. Again and again, people described questioning themselves, ignoring instincts, apologizing for concerns that later proved valid, listening to someone else's version of reality until their own voice became difficult to hear. The similarities stunned me. For years, I believed my experience was unique. It wasn't. That realization brought comfort, not because others suffered, because I finally understood I wasn't alone. One woman shared something that stayed with me. "Trust isn't rebuilt all at once," she smiled. "It's rebuilt one correct instinct at a time." That sentence followed me home. One correct instinct at a time. That was exactly what had been happening. Every decision, every observation, every moment I trusted myself, each one became a brick, a foundation slowly rebuilding beneath my feet. Weeks later, I noticed another change. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. That habit had dominated my life for years, constantly preparing, constantly anticipating disagreements, constantly searching for ways to defend my memory, defend my observations, defend myself. Now, the habit was fading, because I no longer felt responsible for convincing anyone of my reality. Reality doesn't need defending. It simply exists. That lesson may have been the most important gift hidden inside all those security recordings. Not the affairs, not the lies, not even the evidence. The gift was certainty. The certainty that my perceptions mattered, that my memories mattered, that my instincts deserved respect. As I sat on my new dining room chair one evening, looking around a home slowly becoming my own, I realized something remarkable. The footage hadn't merely exposed Marcus's deception, it had exposed my strength, a strength that had been buried beneath years of doubt, a strength that existed all along, a strength I was finally beginning to recognize. And with every passing day, that recognition grew a little stronger. The divorce was finalized almost 2 years after Mrs. Thompson handed me the flash drive. 2 years. Sometimes it felt like an eternity. Other times it felt like the blink of an eye. The legal ending arrived with far less drama than the emotional one. By the time the judge signed the final documents, most of the real work had already happened. The rebuilding, the healing, the learning, the rediscovery of myself. Those things mattered far more than any courtroom decision. Still, seeing the final paperwork brought a sense of closure. Not because it erased the past, because it acknowledged reality, officially, legally, permanently. When I walked out of the courthouse that day, I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt calm, deeply calm, the kind of calm that arrives when a long struggle finally ends. No celebration, no triumph, just peace. And honestly, peace felt better. For years, I thought closure would come from exposing Marcus, from proving he lied, from forcing him to admit the truth. Life rarely works that way. Closure arrived the moment I stopped needing those things, the moment I accepted that my reality didn't require his approval. That lesson changed everything. In the months that followed, my life continued expanding. New friendships, new routines, new opportunities, small things at first, then larger ones. The growth felt gradual, natural, healthy, the opposite of the confusion that once dominated my days. One Saturday morning, I found myself cleaning out old storage boxes. Most contained ordinary items, photographs, documents, holiday decorations. Then I discovered a notebook, one I had forgotten existed. The notebook dated back nearly 7 years, long before the security footage, long before the divorce, long before I understood what was happening. Curious, I opened it. The pages contained observations, dates, questions, small notes I scribbled after arguments. At the time, I created the notebook because I kept feeling confused. I thought writing things down might help. Reading those entries broke my heart. Not because they described betrayal, because they described uncertainty. Page after page contained the same theme. I know what I saw. Why doesn't he? I remember this conversation differently. Maybe I'm mistaken. Something feels wrong. Am I overreacting? The words felt painfully familiar. I remembered writing them, remembered the confusion, remembered the loneliness. What struck me most wasn't the suspicion, it was the self-doubt, the constant self-doubt. Every page showed someone trying desperately to trust herself while simultaneously being taught not to. I sat quietly for a long time reading. Then I noticed something remarkable. Many of those notes matched events later confirmed by the footage. The dates aligned, the details aligned, the instincts aligned. Even years before the camera recordings, I knew. Some part of me always knew. That realization felt incredibly powerful because it reinforced something I had spent years learning. The truth often reaches us long before the evidence does. Sometimes our instincts recognize reality before our minds are willing to accept it. For years, I ignored those instincts, or rather, I was taught to ignore them. Never again. That afternoon, I placed the notebook beside the flash drive. 2 objects, one representing doubt, the other representing confirmation. Together, they told an extraordinary story. Not Marcus's story, mine. The story of someone slowly losing trust in herself, then finding it again. The story of someone manipulated into questioning reality, then reclaiming it. The story of someone who spent years apologizing for being right, then finally stopped apologizing. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The notebook proved I saw the truth. The footage proved I wasn't imagining it. Together, they restored something priceless. Confidence. Not confidence that I would never make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. confidence that I deserved to trust my own experiences, my own observations, my own voice. Later that evening, I took a long walk through the neighborhood, the same neighborhood where so many lies unfolded, the same streets captured by Mrs. Thompson's cameras, the same sidewalks where I once carried enormous uncertainty. Everything looked different now, not because the neighborhood changed, because I had. I walked past Mrs. Thompson's house and smiled. The cameras were still there, quietly watching, quietly recording, quietly preserving reality. Years earlier, they gave me evidence. Now they represented something else, a reminder that truth exists even when people deny it, a reminder that reality doesn't disappear simply because someone argues with it. Most importantly, a reminder that I never needed permission to trust myself. As the sun disappeared behind the trees and the streetlights flickered on, I realized how far I had come. The woman who once questioned every instinct was gone. In her place stood someone very different, someone who finally believed her own eyes. The 3rd year after my divorce felt different from everything that came before it. The years immediately following the discovery were about survival. Then they became about understanding, then rebuilding. By the 3rd year, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in a very long time: living. Not recovering, not investigating, not analyzing, simply living. The distinction mattered more than I can explain. For years, my life revolved around a question: what is true? Every decision eventually led back to that question. Every conversation, every memory, every doubt. Everything became a search for certainty. Now, certainty existed, and because it existed, I finally had room for other things: joy, curiosity, possibility. The return of those things felt almost miraculous. One afternoon, I received a phone call from my daughter. She was visiting from another state and wanted to spend the weekend together. Nothing unusual. We spoke regularly. Yet something she said during that visit stayed with me. We were having lunch when she suddenly smiled. "You know what I notice?" I laughed. "What?" "You trust yourself now." The statement caught me off guard. Not because it was inaccurate, because it came from someone who had witnessed the entire transformation. My daughter saw the old version of me, the uncertain version, the version constantly apologizing, constantly questioning, constantly shrinking herself to accommodate someone else's version of reality. Now she saw someone different, and hearing that difference reflected back to me felt surprisingly emotional. Because sometimes other people notice our growth before we do. The conversation stayed with me for days afterward. Trust yourself now. Such a simple phrase, yet it described years of work, years of healing, years of reclaiming something that should never have been taken in the first place. A few weeks later, I attended a neighborhood gathering. One of those casual community events where people bring food and spend the evening talking, the kind of event Marcus and I attended together for years. At first, I worried the experience might feel strange, awkward, painful. It didn't. In fact, it felt wonderful. Not because the past disappeared, because it no longer controlled the present. I talked, laughed, shared stories, enjoyed myself. The simplicity felt remarkable. There was a time when social situations exhausted me, not because I disliked people, because I spent so much energy second-guessing myself, wondering whether I remembered things correctly, wondering whether my opinions made sense, wondering whether I sounded unreasonable. The constant self-monitoring was exhausting. Now it was gone, and without it, life felt lighter. One evening, while organizing old digital files on my computer, I came across copies of some of the security footage. I hadn't watched them in months, maybe longer. For a moment, I considered deleting them, then paused. Not because I wanted to revisit the pain, because I wanted to understand how I felt about them now. So I opened one of the clips. A familiar scene appeared. Marcus's car, a familiar timestamp, a familiar lie. Years earlier, the footage shattered me. Now, it produced a completely different response. Gratitude. Not gratitude for the betrayal, never that. Gratitude for the clarity. The footage arrived when I needed it most, at exactly the moment I was beginning to lose faith in myself completely. Without it, I honestly don't know how long the self-doubt would have continued. Maybe years, maybe longer. That realization made me appreciate Mrs. Thompson even more. Her decision changed my life, not because she exposed Marcus, because she handed me proof when I needed validation, proof that reality was real, proof that my instincts mattered, proof that my memories deserved trust. The more I reflected on it, the more I understood something important. The security camera wasn't the hero of the story. Neither was the divorce. Neither was the evidence. The hero was trust, the gradual return of trust. Trust in my own judgment, trust in my own observations, trust in my own voice. Everything else followed from that. The divorce, the healing, the rebuilding, the freedom. All of it became possible once trust returned. That night, I sat on my back porch, watching the stars emerge one by one. The air felt cool, comfortable, peaceful, a feeling I once believed I'd never experience again. As I looked up at the night sky, I thought about the woman I used to be, the woman constantly searching for certainty outside herself, the woman needing other people to confirm what she already knew. I felt compassion for her, but I no longer felt trapped by her struggles, because she had grown into someone else, someone stronger, someone steadier, someone who finally understood a simple truth. Your instincts are not the enemy. Sometimes they're the first part of you brave enough to recognize what's really happening. And once I learned that lesson, I stopped fearing my own voice. I started listening to it instead. By the 4th year, people stopped talking about my divorce. At first, I barely noticed. Then one day I realized something strange. Weeks had passed without anyone mentioning Marcus. Months had passed without me mentioning him either. The realization felt significant, not because I wanted to erase the past, because the past was finally staying where it belonged, in the past. For a long time, my story revolved around what happened to me, the lies, the manipulation, the footage, the divorce, the recovery. All important, all real. Yet eventually, I became tired of being defined by those chapters, not ashamed of them, simply ready for new ones. That shift happened gradually. Life expanded. New experiences filled spaces once occupied by old wounds. New memories replaced old obsessions. The healing became less about recovery and more about growth. One afternoon, I volunteered at a local community center. A simple project, nothing extraordinary, helping organize educational materials and mentoring young women preparing for college. During a conversation, one of the girls asked a question. What makes someone confident? The question seemed innocent, ordinary, yet it stopped me completely. Because years earlier, I would have answered differently. Years earlier, I thought confidence meant certainty, being right, never making mistakes, never doubting yourself. Now I knew better. Confidence isn't the absence of doubt, it's the willingness to trust yourself despite uncertainty. The answer surprised even me because it represented everything I had learned, everything I fought to reclaim, everything Marcus spent years trying to take away. The conversation stayed with me long after I returned home. That evening, I sat with a journal and reflected on the question, what makes someone confident? The answer felt clearer than ever. Confidence begins when you stop outsourcing your reality, when you stop asking everyone else to tell you what you already know, when you stop assuming your perceptions require permission to exist. That lesson changed my life. And strangely enough, it continued helping me years after the divorce ended. Not because I faced major crises, because everyday life still requires trust. Trust in decisions, trust in relationships, trust in opportunities, trust in yourself. The difference now was simple. I no longer viewed my instincts as something dangerous. I viewed them as information, valuable information. Not always perfect, not always complete, but worthy of consideration. That perspective transformed everything. A few months later, I attended a neighborhood barbecue, one of those casual gatherings where conversations drift naturally from topic to topic. At some point, someone mentioned Mrs. Thompson. The entire group smiled. Everyone had a story about her. Everyone appreciated her kindness, her generosity, her habit of looking out for people. As the conversation continued, I found myself smiling too, because nobody else knew what she had done for me. Not really. They knew she was kind. I knew she changed the course of my life. The thought filled me with gratitude, not because she gave me evidence, because she gave me validation, and validation arrived precisely when I needed it. The older I became, the more I understood how valuable that gift was. Sometimes people don't need advice. Sometimes they don't need solutions. Sometimes they simply need confirmation that they aren't imagining reality, that their experiences matter, that their voice matters, that they matter. Mrs. Thompson gave me that gift, and I would always be grateful. Later that evening, I walked home beneath a sky filled with stars. The neighborhood felt familiar, comfortable, safe. The same streets that once carried painful memories now carried different ones, peaceful ones, hopeful ones. The transformation felt symbolic. Nothing outside me had changed dramatically. The houses were the same, the roads were the same, the trees were the same. I was the one who changed. I was the one who learned. I was the one who healed. And as I walked beneath the stars, another realization settled quietly inside me. The greatest victory wasn't winning the divorce. It wasn't exposing Marcus. It wasn't proving the truth. The greatest victory was learning to trust myself again, because once that trust returned, everything else became possible. Friendship, peace, joy, confidence, freedom. All of it began with a simple decision to believe my own eyes. And years later, that decision remained one of the most important choices I had ever made. 5 years after Mrs. Thompson knocked on my door carrying that small flash drive, I found myself sitting on a quiet park bench watching the world move around me. Children laughed on a nearby playground. A young couple walked hand in hand along a winding path. Dogs chased tennis balls across open grass. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park. Everything felt peaceful, ordinary, beautiful. And for a long time, I simply sat there appreciating it. The simplicity of the moment wasn't something I would have noticed years earlier. Back then, my mind was constantly busy, analyzing, questioning, second-guessing, searching for certainty, searching for explanations, searching for permission to trust myself. Now, the searching was over. That realization felt like freedom, not dramatic freedom, quiet freedom. The kind that settles into your life so gradually you barely notice it until one day you realize it's everywhere. I thought about the woman I used to be, the woman who stood in her kitchen apologizing for asking reasonable questions, the woman who doubted her own memories because someone else insisted they were wrong, the woman who spent years trying to reconcile reality with explanations that never quite fit. I felt tenderness toward her, compassion, respect, because she survived something difficult, something many people never fully understand. The damage caused by lies is obvious. The damage caused by manipulation is deeper. When someone repeatedly convinces you not to trust your own mind, the wound reaches places evidence alone can't heal. For years, I thought Marcus's affairs were the greatest betrayal. Eventually, I realized something different. The greatest betrayal wasn't what he did, it was what he taught me to believe about myself, that my instincts were unreliable, that my observations were flawed, that my concerns were irrational, that my voice couldn't be trusted. Those beliefs hurt me far longer than any affair ever could. And that's why the security footage mattered so much. Not because it exposed Marcus, because it restored me. People often ask what the recordings revealed. The answer is simple. They revealed the truth. But not just the truth about Marcus, the truth about me. The footage confirmed something I had forgotten. I wasn't confused. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining things. I was paying attention the whole time. That realization changed the course of my life. Years later, I still keep the flash drive, not because I watch the videos. I don't. In fact, I haven't viewed them in years. The flash drive sits inside a small memory box alongside old photographs, journals, and personal keepsakes. A reminder. Nothing more. Sometimes people assume it represents betrayal. It doesn't. For me, it represents validation, proof that reality remains real even when someone tries to convince you otherwise, proof that your instincts deserve respect, proof that your voice matters. Those lessons became part of everything I did afterward. Friendships, relationships, work, family. Every area of my life improved once I stopped treating my own perceptions like evidence that needed approval. The change was remarkable, not because I became fearless, because I became honest with myself. And honesty creates a kind of peace that's difficult to describe, a peace built on alignment, your thoughts matching your experiences matching reality, your reality no longer dependent on someone else's permission. As I sat on that park bench, a familiar figure appeared in the distance, Mrs. Thompson. Older now, moving more slowly, but still unmistakably herself. She smiled when she saw me. I smiled back. For a moment, we simply waved. No conversation necessary, no explanations needed. Some people enter your life briefly and change it forever. Mrs. Thompson was one of those people, not because she intended to, because she chose kindness when it mattered, because she chose honesty when it mattered, because she trusted that I deserved the truth. The sun drifted lower toward the horizon. Golden light filled the park. Families gathered their belongings. Children headed home. The day slowly moved toward evening. I sat there a little longer, watching it all unfold, feeling grateful. Not grateful for what happened, not grateful for the pain, not grateful for the betrayal, grateful for what came afterward, the growth, the healing, the rediscovery of myself. 5 years ago, I thought a security camera exposed my husband's lies. Now I understood the truth. The camera did something far more important. It gave me back my trust. And once I trusted myself again, everything changed. The marriage ended, the lies ended, the manipulation ended, but something stronger began. A life built on truth, a life built on confidence, a life built on the simple but powerful belief that my voice deserved to be heard. As the last rays of sunlight stretched across the park, I stood and started walking home, not looking backward, not searching for answers, not doubting myself, just moving forward, certain, peaceful, free. And for the first time in many years, I knew without question that I could trust every step.